The clock's second hand sliced through Nathan Brooks's final moments, each tick a blade carving his fate into the cold steel of Ironwood State Prison. Dawn's gray light clawed through narrow window slits, too weak to warm the concrete walls or soften the dread pooling in Nathan's chest. Shackled to a steel bed in the secure wing at 6 o'clock a.m. On May 25, 2025, he lay motionless, his gaunt frame etched with 5 years of unrelenting despair. His brown eyes, shadowed by sleepless nights, traced the ceiling's cracks like a map of his shattered life. Calloused hands, rough from his days as a mechanic, twitched against the restraints, betraying a flicker of defiance beneath his exhaustion. Nathan had shouted his innocence to deaf ears for half a decade, convicted of a murder he swore he didn't commit. The weight of the lethal injection, scheduled for 9 o'clock a.m., pressed harder than the chains binding him. His only solace was a single burning wish: to see Shadow, his German shepherd, one last time. "Please," he rasped to the guard outside his cell, his voice gravelly from disuse. "Let me see my dog before it's over." The guard, a burly man with a face like chipped stone, shifted uncomfortably but said nothing. Nathan's plea hung in the air, fragile as the dawn light. He closed his eyes, picturing Shadow's amber gaze, the dog's eager bounds through Redwood City's quiet streets. That memory was a lifeline, the only thing tethering him to a world that had forsaken him. Outside, the prison's corridors echoed with the rhythmic thud of boots, a grim metronome counting down his hours. Nathan's mind flickered to the trial, the gavel's final slam, the jury's cold stares. He hadn't killed Edward Langston, but no one believed him. Not the judge, not the press, not the city he once called home. Yet Shadow, with his unwavering loyalty, had never doubted him. Nathan's throat tightened. If he could just feel that warm fur under his hands one more time, maybe he could face the needle with some semblance of peace. At 6:25 a.m., the cell door's lock clanked, jarring Nathan from his thoughts. Warden Clara Hensley stepped into the dim light, her crisp uniform a stark contrast to the cell's bleakness. Her silver-streaked hair was pulled tight, and a faint scar curved along her cheek, a silent testament to battles fought beyond these walls. Her hazel eyes, sharp yet not unkind, studied Nathan with a weight that felt personal. "Brooks," she said, her voice steady but softer than protocol demanded, "final requests are tricky. Bringing a dog into Ironwood isn't standard procedure." Nathan's heart sank, but he forced his voice to hold. "Shadow's with Emily Carter, my fiancée. She's in Redwood City. She'll bring him." His words scratched out, raw with desperation he tried to mask. Clara's posture stiffened, but her gaze flickered with something like sympathy. "I'll make a call," she said, "but don't pin your hopes on it. We don't even know if the dog's still in her care." Nathan nodded, too drained to argue. His weathered hands clenched the edge of the bed, knuckles whitening. He knew Emily would never part with Shadow. The dog was their last link to a life stolen by a courtroom's verdict. Clara lingered a moment, her fingers brushing the clipboard she held. "You've got 2 hours before they move you to the final cell," she added, almost gently. "I'll see what I can do." She turned to leave, her boots clicking against the floor, each step a reminder of the ticking clock. Nathan leaned back, the steel bed cold against his spine. He pictured Emily's face, her green eyes fierce with determination, and Shadow's tail thumping like a heartbeat. The thought of them kept him anchored, even as the prison's walls seemed to close in tighter. By 6:53 a.m., Nathan's cell felt like a tomb, the single bulb overhead casting harsh shadows across his hollowed cheeks. He hadn't slept in days, his body worn thin by the relentless march toward execution. Yet a stubborn spark of defiance burned in his chest, fueled by the truth he'd clung to since his arrest. He was no murderer. For 5 years, he'd shouted it to lawyers, guards, anyone who'd listen. Only Chaplain David Wells, with his quiet doubts, had ever seemed to waver in disbelief. Now, with hours left, Nathan's fight felt futile, yet he couldn't let go. He shuffled to the cell's high rectangular window, chains clinking around his ankles. Peering through the slit, he caught a glimpse of dawn's pinkish hue spreading across the horizon. It reminded him of early mornings walking shadow through Redwood City's empty streets, the German shepherd tugging at the leash, tail wagging like a metronome. Strangers would stop, charmed by Shadow's energy, asking, "You train him yourself?" Nathan's proud yes echoed in his memory, a ghost of a life where he was more than a condemned man. Outside, voices drifted through the corridor, guards discussing protesters gathering beyond the prison's barbed wire. "Half want him dead," one muttered. "The other half want the death penalty gone." Nathan shut his eyes, the words a bitter reminder of a world that had already judged him. In 2 hours, the needle would silence his truth forever. He sank onto the bunk, chains rattling, and pressed his palms to his face. Shadow's image flickered in his mind, those amber eyes, that joyful bark. If he could just hold that dog one last time, maybe he could face the end without breaking. At 6 a.m. on May 25, 2025, Emily Carter stood frozen in her Redwood City townhouse, the television's cold glow illuminating her pale face. The news ticker blazed. Nathan Brooks' execution set for 9 a.m. at Ironwood State Prison. Her green eyes, bloodshot from a sleepless night, locked on the screen, her fingers twisting the engagement ring she still wore, its edges worn smooth from years of anxious habit. Her chestnut hair hung loose, framing a face etched with 5 years of unrelenting grief. The weight of Nathan's fate crushed her chest, but a spark of defiance flared. She would not let him die alone. Shadow, the German shepherd, lay curled on his dog bed, his black and tan fur flecked with silver, a faint scar on his flank catching the light. At the sound of Emily's sharp intake of breath, his amber eyes snapped open, ears perking. He sensed her urgency, rising with a low whine, his tail giving a tentative wag. Emily crouched beside him, her hands trembling as she stroked his head. "We're going to see Nathan, boy," she whispered, her voice cracking. Shadow's presence was a lifeline, the last tether to the life she and Nathan had dreamed of. An engagement, a shared apartment, a future stolen by a wrongful conviction. Emily grabbed Shadow's leash from the cluttered kitchen counter, her movements frantic. She threw on a worn jacket, ignoring the pile of unopened mail and the half-packed boxes that marked her unsettled life. The phone call from Warden Clara Hensley was due any minute, and Emily clung to the hope that Nathan's final wish would be granted. Shadow nudged her leg, his warmth grounding her. She clipped the leash to his collar, her resolve hardening like steel. "We're not giving up," she told him, her voice firm despite the tears threatening to spill. They had to reach Ironwood before time ran out. By 6:30 a.m., Emily's pickup truck roared down Redwood City's empty streets, the engine's hum a counterpoint to her pounding heart. Dawn painted the sky in streaks of pink and orange, but the beauty felt cruel, a reminder of the hours slipping away. Emily gripped the wheel, her knuckles white, pushing the speed limit as she navigated toward Ironwood State Prison. Shadow sat in the back, his amber eyes fixed on the passing world, a soft whine escaping his throat as if he sensed the gravity of their mission. Memories flooded Emily's mind, sharp and painful. 5 years ago, police had swarmed their apartment, dragging Nathan away for Edward Langston's murder. The evidence, a partial fingerprint, shaky witness accounts, a dubious financial motive, had been flimsy, yet it sealed his fate. Emily had fought tirelessly, writing letters, pleading with lawyers, but every appeal failed. Now, with Nathan's execution looming at 9 a.m., her chest ached with the weight of lost time. She glanced at Shadow in the rearview mirror, his scarred flank a testament to his own resilience. "He's innocent," she murmured, as much to herself as to the dog. "We know that, don't we?" The phone buzzed on the passenger seat, jolting her. An unknown number flashed. Ironwood. Heart racing, she answered. "Miss Carter, this is Warden Hensley," came the calm, official voice. "Nathan's requested to see his dog. Can you bring him within 90 minutes? Emily's breath caught. "We're already on our way," she said, voice trembling with relief and urgency. "We'll be there." She hung up, her pulse thundering. 90 minutes to cross the city, to give Nathan one last moment of love. She pressed the gas harder, the truck lurching forward, determined to defy the clock. At 7:15 a.m., Emily pulled into Ironwood State Prison's parking lot, the barbed wire fences looming like a cage against the brightening sky. Her hands shook as she parked, the weight of the moment pressing down. Shadow shifted in the back, his tail thumping softly, sensing they were close to Nathan. Emily stepped out, the morning air sharp against her skin, and clipped Shadow's leash. His amber eyes gleamed with alertness, his scarred body tense with anticipation. She smoothed her jacket, trying to steady her nerves, and approached the security booth. A correctional officer, his face stern under a buzz cut, checked his clipboard. "You're here for Brooks' final request?" he asked, voice flat. Emily nodded, her throat tight. "I have his dog, Shadow." The officer's gaze flicked to the German shepherd, then back to his papers. "Wait here. We need to confirm with the warden." Emily's stomach churned. What if they turned her away? What if protocol crushed Nathan's last hope? She stroked Shadow's head, drawing strength from his warmth. "We're almost there, boy," she whispered, her voice barely steady. Minutes dragged like hours, each second a test of her resolve. Finally, the officer waved her through to a side entrance. Emily's heart leapt, but fear lingered. Bureaucracy could still steal this moment. She led Shadow forward, his nails clicking on the asphalt, his ears perked as if he knew Nathan was near. The prison's grey walls loomed, a stark contrast to the vibrant dawn. Emily clutched the leash, her ring twisting under her fingers. "Hold on, Nathan," she murmured, her voice a vow. "We're coming for you." Shadow let out a soft bark, as if echoing her promise, ready to reunite with the man he'd never forgotten. At 7:30 a.m., Detective James Carter stood alone in his modest Redwood City apartment, the weight of 30 years on the force pressing against his temples. His salt and pepper beard framed a face lined with regret, his grey eyes sharp but weary, a faint limp from an old injury slowing his pacing. The television blared updates on Nathan Brooks's impending execution, each word a jab at James's conscience. 5 years ago, he'd led the investigation that put Nathan on death row, a case built on partial fingerprints, a questionable bank deposit, and shaky eyewitnesses. Back then, it seemed airtight. Now, at 7:32 a.m. on May 25th, 2025, doubt gnawed at him like a persistent ache. James's old partner had planted the seed 2 years ago, whispering about coached witnesses and missing digital trails. The victim, Edward Langston, a real estate magnate, had enemies with deeper motives than Nathan, a mechanic with no record. James grabbed his burner phone, a precaution from his days chasing Redwood City's underbelly. He dialed a contact, a data specialist named Riley, known for unearthing buried truths. "I need you to dig into Langston's financials," James said, his voice low and urgent. "Anything tying to a fixer named Victor Kane. We've got hours, not days." Riley's gruff reply promised results, but time was a luxury James didn't have. He sank into a chair, his limp legs stiff from tension. Nathan's bewildered face during the interrogation haunted him, a man who seemed too genuine to be a killer. James had ignored the inconsistencies, eager to close the case. Now, with Nathan's life on the line, he couldn't stay silent. He pulled on his jacket, the leather creaking, and holstered his sidearm out of habit. The truth was out there, and he'd find it, even if it cost him everything. By 8 o'clock a.m., James was in the Redwood City police station's basement, the air thick with the musty scent of old paper. The records room, dimly lit and cluttered with dusty boxes, felt like a crypt for forgotten truths. James's grey eyes scanned the shelves, his limp slowing his steps as he confronted the clerk, a wiry man with a skeptical frown. "I need the Langston murder files," James demanded, flashing his badge. The clerk hesitated, muttering about protocol, but James's steely glare silenced him. "It's a wrongful conviction." "Move." The clerk returned with 2 boxes, their edges frayed from neglect. James hauled them to an empty interrogation room, the door slamming behind him. He tore into the files, his fingers smudging faded ink. Crime scene photos, witness statements. Most were familiar, cherry-picked to convict Nathan. Then he found it. A second forensic report, labeled Crime Scene Analysis Number 2, dated 3 days after the murder. His pulse spiked. Unaccounted footprints, smaller than Nathan's. Gunpowder residue, inconsistent with the knife used in Langston's death. Signs of forced entry through a fire escape window. The report ended with a damning note. Inconclusive due to chain of custody issues, not forwarded to primary case file. James's blood boiled. This was buried, deliberately. The prosecution had sold Nathan's guilt with a single narrative, ignoring evidence that screamed of another suspect. He gripped the folder, his limp forgotten as adrenaline surged. This could save Nathan, but only if he acted fast. The execution was an hour away. At 8:30 a.m., James sped toward the county courthouse, the unmarked sedan's tires screeching through Redwood City's morning traffic. His phone buzzed with a text from Riley. Found Kane's burner phone logs. "Pinging near Langston's penthouse the night of the murder. Need more time." James cursed under his breath, typing back, "We don't have time. Execution's at 9 o'clock. Get me something solid." The city's skyline loomed, its glass towers glinting in the pale sun, a mocking contrast to the urgency gripping him. James's plan was reckless but clear. If Riley's data confirmed Victor Kane's involvement, he'd storm into Ironwood, confront Warden Hensley, and demand a stay. If that failed, he'd go straight to the DA, even if it meant torching his career. The suppressed forensic report burned in his mind. Footprints, gunpowder, a break-in. Someone had orchestrated Nathan's conviction, and James had been complicit, blinded by the rush to close the case. His grey eyes narrowed, fixed on the road. He'd failed Nathan once. Not again. As he pulled into the courthouse lot, his phone vibrated again. Riley's message flashed. Kane's phone went dark at 12:07 a.m. near Langston's penthouse. Matches time of death. James's heart raced. It wasn't proof, but it was a crack in the case, enough to cast doubt. He grabbed the forensic report, his limp barely slowing him as he strode toward the courthouse doors. Nathan's life hung by a thread, and James was ready to pull it back from the edge. At 7:45 a.m. on May 8, 2025, Nathan Brooks sat in Ironwood Prison's final holding cell, a sterile cube of whitewashed concrete that seemed to shrink with every shallow breath he took. The fluorescent light overhead buzzed faintly, casting stark shadows across his gaunt face, his brown eyes hollowed by 5 years of confinement. His calloused hands, chained to a steel table, trembled slightly, not from fear, but from the fragile hope that Shadow, his German shepherd, might soon bound through the door. The execution loomed at 9 o'clock a.m., less than 90 minutes away, and this reunion was his final anchor to a life he'd lost. Nathan's mind drifted to the summer he'd adopted Shadow, a gangly pup with oversized paws from a Redwood City shelter. He'd spent months training him, teaching him to sit, stay, and fetch with a tennis ball that Shadow would chase until dusk. Those mornings by Redwood Creek, with Shadow's joyful barks echoing, felt like a dream now, stolen by a conviction for Edward Langston's murder, a crime Nathan swore he didn't commit. The chains bit into his wrists as he leaned forward, straining to hear any sign of Shadow's approach. Every distant clang in the prison's corridors sent his heart racing, only to crash when it was just another guard's footsteps. He pictured Shadow's amber eyes, the way they'd lock onto his with unshakable trust. If he could just see that gaze one more time, feel the dog's warm fur under his fingers, maybe he could face the needle with some shred of peace. The clock on the wall ticked mercilessly. 7:50 a.m. Nathan's throat tightened. Emily had to be close now, Shadow in tow. He clung to that thought, refusing to let despair swallow him whole. At 8 o'clock a.m., the holding cell's heavy door groaned open, and Nathan's breath caught. Shadow burst through, his black and tan fur gleaming under the harsh lights, his amber eyes blazing with recognition. A silver-streaked muzzle and a faint scar on his flank marked the years, but his energy was undimmed. He lunged forward, tail whipping like a metronome, and pressed his head against Nathan's chest, a low, joyful whine escaping his throat. Nathan's chains rattled as he reached out, his calloused hands sinking into Shadow's fur, the warmth flooding him with a rush of relief so intense it hurt. Emily Carter followed, her green eyes glistening with tears, her chestnut hair disheveled from the frantic drive. She wore the same worn jacket from earlier, her engagement ring catching the light as she twisted it nervously. "Nathan," she whispered, her voice breaking. She stepped closer, her hand brushing his shoulder, and for a moment, the prison's walls seemed to fade. Nathan's gaze met hers, a silent vow passing between them, love unbroken by 5 years of separation. Shadow nudged Nathan's arm, demanding attention, and a choked laugh escaped him, the sound foreign after years of silence. The guard at the door, a younger man with a tense jaw, shifted uncomfortably. 10 minutes, he said, his voice clipped. Nathan didn't care. He buried his face in Shadow's fur, inhaling the familiar scent of earth and dog. Emily knelt beside them, her hand resting on Shadow's back, their shared grief and hope intertwining. "He's missed you," she said softly, her voice thick. Nathan nodded, unable to speak, his heart swelling with a love that no cell could contain. By 8:10 a.m., Nathan savored every second with Shadow, his hands tracing the dog's scarred flank, memorizing the feel of his fur. The holding cell's starkness melted away, replaced by the memory of Redwood City's quiet streets, where he and Shadow once roamed at dawn. Emily sat across from him, her green eyes fierce despite the tears streaking her face. "I'm still fighting," she said, her voice low but resolute. "This isn't the end." Nathan met her gaze, his chest tight with gratitude and guilt. She'd carried their hope alone for too long. Warden Clara Hensley appeared at the door, her silver-streaked hair catching the light, her scarred cheek softening her otherwise stern expression. "I'm bending protocol," she said, her tone measured but kind. "You can have 15 more minutes." Nathan's eyes widened, a rare spark of hope igniting. He nodded, unable to find words, and turned back to Shadow, who lay pressed against his leg, amber eyes calm and trusting. The dog's presence was a balm, easing the dread that had gnawed at Nathan for years. As the clock ticked toward 8:25 a.m., Nathan's thoughts churned. The reunion was a gift, but the execution still loomed. He stroked Shadow's head, whispering, "You've been my best friend, boy." Emily reached for his hand, her fingers trembling but firm. For a fleeting moment, they were a family again, unbroken by Ironwood's walls. Yet Nathan's hope was tempered by fear. Would this be the last time he felt this warmth, this love? At 8:30 a.m. on May 8, 2025, Detective James Carter stood in Warden Clara Hensley's office at Ironwood State Prison, the air thick with tension. His salt and pepper beard framed a face taut with urgency, his gray eyes burning with the weight of new evidence. The forensic report, clutched in his weathered hands, detailed unaccounted footprints and gunpowder residue from Edward Langston's murder scene, evidence buried 5 years ago. A text from his data specialist, Riley, confirmed Victor Kane's burner phone pinged near Langston's penthouse at the time of death. James's limp, a constant reminder of an old injury, didn't slow him as he leaned forward, voice low and urgent. "Warden, we've got a problem," James said, sliding the report across Clara's desk. "Nathan Brooks didn't kill Langston. This points to Victor Kane, a fixer tied to Redwood City's real estate sharks." Clara's hazel eyes narrowed, her silver-streaked hair glinting under the office's fluorescent lights. Her scarred cheek twitched slightly, betraying her unease. "You're saying the DA's case was built on lies?" she asked, her tone sharp but curious. James nodded. "Suppressed evidence. Kane's phone logs place him at the scene. We need a stay, now." Clara leaned back, fingers drumming on the desk. "You're asking me to halt an execution with 30 minutes to spare, Carter. That's a tall order." James's jaw tightened. He'd built the case against Nathan, and the guilt of his oversight fueled his resolve. "If we don't act, an innocent man dies," he said, his voice steady despite the stakes. Clara's gaze held his, weighing his words. She reached for her phone, her decision unspoken but clear. She'd make the call. At 8:40 a.m., Emily Carter paced outside Ironwood's visitation wing, her green eyes blazing with desperation. Shadow sat at her side, his scarred flank rising with each steady breath, his amber eyes fixed on the prison's gray walls. Emily's chestnut hair was pulled back, her engagement ring twisting furiously under her fingers. She'd just left Nathan, their reunion cut short by the guard's orders, but the fire in her chest burned hotter than ever. She wasn't done fighting, not now, not ever. James emerged from the warden's office, his limp pronounced, but his face alight with purpose. Emily intercepted him, her voice sharp. "What's happening, Carter? Nathan's running out of time." James held up the forensic report, his gray eyes meeting hers. "We found evidence, footprints, gunpowder, a fixer named Victor Kane. I'm pushing for a stay." Emily's breath hitched, hope warring with fear. "You're the one who arrested him," she snapped, her pain raw. "Why should I trust you now?" James flinched but stood his ground. "Because I was wrong," he admitted, his voice low. "I missed this, and I'm fixing it." Emily's gaze softened, seeing the guilt etched in his face. She thought of Nathan's trial, the rushed evidence, the DA's smug certainty. "Then don't stop," she said, her voice fierce. "Get to the DA, the governor, whoever it takes." Shadow let out a low growl as if urging James on. Emily's resolve hardened. She'd fight alongside anyone to save Nathan. By 8:50 a.m., Assistant DA Robert Hayes stormed into Ironwood's administrative wing, his polished suit rumpled, his thinning hair slick with sweat. His nervous tick, adjusting his glasses, betrayed the cracks in his usual composure. The news of James's evidence had reached him mid-commute, and the implications shook him. 5 years ago, he'd prosecuted Nathan Brooks with airtight confidence, painting the mechanic as a cold-blooded killer. Now, doubt crept in like poison. James met him in the corridor, the forensic report in hand. "Robert, read this," he said, his voice firm. "Kane's phone logs, suppressed forensics. Nathan's innocent." Robert's face tightened, glasses sliding as he adjusted them. Footprints not matching Nathan's, gunpowder residue suggesting a second weapon, a fire escape entry never disclosed. "This is circumstantial at best," he snapped, but his voice wavered. James stepped closer, his grey eyes steady. "You ignored this to win a case. If Nathan dies, that's on you." Robert's hand shook as he adjusted his glasses again. He remembered Nathan's investigation, the pressure from above to close the case, Langston's enemies who'd wanted it buried quickly, had he been played. Clara appeared, her voice commanding. "The governor's on the line," she said. "He's asking for your input, Hayes." Robert's stomach churned. The evidence wasn't definitive, but it was enough to haunt him. "We need time," he muttered, his confidence crumbling. The clock ticked toward 9 a.m., and Nathan's fate hung in the balance. At 8:55 a.m. on May 8, 2025, Warden Clara Hensley stood in her Ironwood State Prison office. The phone pressed to her ear, her silver-streaked hair catching the fluorescent glare. Her scarred cheek was set in a grim line as she listened to the governor's voice crackle through the line. Detective James Carter stood opposite, his grey eyes locked on her, the forensic report still clutched in his weathered hands. Emily Carter hovered near the door, her green eyes wide with desperate hope, her engagement ring twisting under her fingers. The clock on the wall ticked mercilessly. 5 minutes from Nathan Brooks' scheduled execution. "The evidence is compelling," Clara said into the phone, her voice steady but urgent. "Phone logs place Victor Kane at the crime scene, and we've got suppressed forensics, footprints, gunpowder residue. We need a stay." The governor's response was measured, but Clara's grip tightened as she pressed. 48 hours, sir." "That's all we're asking to verify this." James exhaled sharply, his limp leg shifting with restless energy. Emily's breath hitched, her chestnut hair falling into her face as she leaned forward, clinging to every word. A long pause stretched, then Clara's shoulders relaxed. "Thank you, Governor," she said, hanging up. She met James's gaze. 48-hour stay granted, effective immediately. Emily gasped, her hands flying to her mouth, tears spilling over. James's face broke into a rare, relieved grin, his guilt easing for the first time in years. "We did it," he muttered, almost to himself. Clara's hazel eyes softened, but her tone remained firm. "This buys us time, not freedom. Get me more evidence." The room buzzed with fragile hope, the execution's shadow retreating, for now. At 9:05 a.m., Nathan Brooks sat in the holding cell, his calloused hands still warm from Shadow's fur, his brown eyes fixed on the concrete floor. The reunion with his German shepherd and Emily had been a fleeting lifeline, but the execution's weight still crushed him. A guard's boots echoed outside and Nathan braced himself, expecting the final escort to the injection room. Instead, Chaplain David Wells entered, his graying beard framing a face gentle with cautious hope, his calm voice a stark contrast to the cell's sterility. "Nathan," David said, kneeling beside him, "the governor's granted a 48-hour stay. You're not going anywhere today." Nathan's head snapped up, his gaunt face etched with disbelief. "A stay?" he rasped, his voice raw. "Why?" David's eyes crinkled with a faint smile. "New evidence. Your detective friend Carter found something. Phone logs, forensics. They're looking into it. Nathan's chest tightened, hope and fear colliding. 5 years of proclaiming his innocence, and now a crack in the system's armor. He leaned against the wall, his chains clinking, and pictured Shadow's amber eyes, Emily's fierce determination. "Is it enough?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. David rested a hand on his shoulder. "It's a start. Hold on to that." Nathan nodded, his thoughts racing. The stay was a lifeline, but freedom felt impossibly distant. He clung to the image of walking Shadow by Redwood Creek, a dream that kept him from breaking. By 9:20 a.m., Nathan was moved to a new cell in Ironwood's General Population Wing, a small room with a barred window that let in a sliver of morning light. The chains were gone, replaced by a jumpsuit that hung loose on his frame. He stood at the window, his brown eyes tracing the horizon, the first time in years he'd seen the world without shackles. The stay had bought him time, but the uncertainty gnawed at him. Would 48 hours be enough to prove his innocence? Outside, Emily stood in the prison's parking lot, Shadow at her side, his scarred flank gleaming in the sun. Her green eyes burned with resolve as she dialed a journalist friend, determined to amplify Nathan's case. "We've got to stay," she said, her voice fierce. "New evidence. Victor Kane suppressed forensics. Spread the word." Shadow nudged her leg, his amber eyes steady, as if urging her on. Emily stroked his head, her ring glinting. "We're not stopping," she vowed, her heart set on Nathan's freedom. Back in the cell, Nathan sat on the bunk, his calloused hands clasped. The stay was a miracle, but the fear of returning to death row lingered. He thought of Emily's promise to fight, of Shadow's unwavering loyalty. For the first time in years, a spark of hope flickered, fragile but real, lighting the path ahead. At 10:00 a.m. on May 8, 2025, Detective James Carter hunched over a cluttered desk in Redwood City's police station, the air heavy with the scent of stale coffee. His gray eyes, sharp despite his exhaustion, scanned a second suppressed forensic report from Edward Langston's murder, unearthed from a forgotten archive. His salt-and-pepper beard bristled as he read. Conclusive evidence of forced entry through a penthouse fire escape, gunpowder residue on a discarded glove, and a partial shoe print, too small for Nathan Brooks' size 11 boots. The report, stamped not admissible, screamed of a cover-up, and James's blood ran cold. He leaned back, his limp leg aching from hours of relentless work. The first report had pointed to Victor Kane, a fixer for Redwood City's elite, but this one tightened the noose. James's contact, Riley, had traced Kane's financials, revealing payments from a shell company tied to Langston's real estate rivals. "This wasn't just a murder," James muttered, his voice low. "It was a hit. The pieces fit. Kane's phone logs, the buried forensics, the rushed conviction. Nathan had been a scapegoat, and James had helped seal his fate." James grabbed his burner phone, texting Riley, "Link Kane's payments to Langston's enemies. We need names." The stay gave them 48 hours, but every second counted. He stood, ignoring the pain in his leg, and gathered the reports. This evidence could force a new investigation, maybe even free Nathan. But exposing a conspiracy this deep would make enemies, powerful ones. James didn't care. He'd failed Nathan once. He wouldn't again. By 11:30 a.m., James sat in an empty interrogation room. The second report spread before him, its pages a map of his own failures. His gray eyes traced the words, each one a reminder of Nathan's interrogation 5 years ago. Nathan had sat in this very room, his brown eyes wide with confusion, insisting he'd never met Langston. James had dismissed it, swayed by the DA's narrative and a partial fingerprint on a knife. Now the memory burned, a wound he couldn't ignore. He recalled Nathan's voice, steady but desperate. "I was fixing a car that night." Check the shop's cameras. The cameras had been conveniently offline, and James hadn't pushed harder. The glove with gunpowder residue, the fire escape entry, none of it had surfaced at trial. Someone had orchestrated this, and James had been too eager to close the case to see it. His limp leg throbbed as he stood, pacing the room, his guilt a heavy weight. He'd built a career on truth, yet he'd sent an innocent man to death row. James's phone buzzed. Riley. Payments traced to 3 businessmen, Hargrove, Patel, and Stein, Langston's competitors. James's jaw tightened. These were Redwood City's untouchables, men with enough pull to bury evidence and frame a mechanic. He needed more, wire transfers, communications, anything to tie them to Kane. He typed back, "Keep digging. I'm heading to the DA." The truth was close, and James would drag it into the light, no matter the cost. At 1:00 p.m., James stood outside the Redwood City courthouse, the sun high but offering no warmth. His gray eyes scanned a new text from Riley. Kane's burner phone received a call from Hargrove's office hours before Langston's murder. Call lasted 90 seconds. James's pulse quickened. This was the link, a direct connection between Kane and one of Langston's rivals. The second forensic report, now tucked in his jacket, corroborated Kane's presence at the crime scene. Together, they could unravel Nathan's conviction. He called Warden Clara Hensley, his voice urgent. "We've got Kane's phone records tying him to Richard Hargrove, one of Langston's competitors. The forensic report confirms a setup." "I'm meeting the DA to push for a full investigation." Clara's response was crisp. "Get it to the governor's office too. We need this airtight." James nodded, his limp barely slowing him as he strode toward the DA's office, determination fueling every step. Meanwhile, Emily Carter sat in her truck outside Ironwood, Shadow's head resting on her lap. Her phone buzzed with a cryptic text, "Back off, or you'll regret it." Her green eyes narrowed, fear giving way to fury. She forwarded it to James, typing, "Someone's scared." "Keep pushing." Shadow whined, his amber eyes alert, as if sensing the danger. Emily's resolve hardened. The truth was breaking through, and she'd fight to see Nathan walk free. At 3:00 p.m. on May 8, 2025, Detective James Carter sat in a dimly lit Redwood City diner, the clink of cutlery a faint backdrop to his racing thoughts. His gray eyes, shadowed by exhaustion, pored over a printout from Riley, his data specialist. The document mapped Victor Kane's financial trail. Wire transfers from a shell company linked to Richard Hargrove, a real estate tycoon who'd clashed with Edward Langston over Redwood City's waterfront development. Kane, a fixer with a reputation for silencing problems, had been paid $50,000 the day before Langston's murder. James's salt and pepper beard bristled as he connected the dots. This was no random killing. Langston, a ruthless developer with a trail of enemies, had been a threat to Hargrove's empire. The suppressed forensic report, gunpowder residue, forced entry, mismatched footprints, pointed to Kane's handiwork, not Nathan Brooks. James's limp leg ached under the table, a reminder of his relentless pursuit. Riley's latest text confirmed Kane's burner phone had pinged at Langston's penthouse at 12:05 a.m., minutes before the estimated time of death. Hargrove hired Kane to take Langston out. James muttered, his voice low. The conspiracy ran deep, and Nathan had been framed to tie up loose ends. James sipped his coffee, the bitter taste grounding him. Exposing Hargrove meant challenging Redwood City's elite, men who'd buried evidence to protect their wealth. He texted Riley. "Find Hargrove's emails with Kane. Emails, texts, anything. The 48-hour stay gave Nathan a chance, but only if James could prove the setup. He stood, his leather jacket creaking, ready to confront the DA with this bombshell. The truth was a weapon, and he'd wield it to free an innocent man. At 4:30 p.m., Assistant DA Robert Hayes sat in his Redwood City office, the city's glass skyline, a mocking contrast to his unraveling composure. His thinning hair was damp with sweat, his nervous tick of adjusting his glasses more frantic as he reread James's evidence. The forensic report and Kane's phone logs shredded the case he'd built against Nathan Brooks 5 years ago. Hargrove's name, now tied to Kane, sent a chill down his spine. Robert had prosecuted Nathan with confidence, but whispers of pressure from Langston's rivals now echoed in his memory. James burst in, his grey eyes blazing, the printout in hand. "Hargrove paid Kane to kill Langston," he said, voice sharp. "Nathan was a patsy, and you let it happen." Robert's face flushed, his glasses slipping. "You're accusing me of misconduct?" he snapped, but his voice cracked. He recalled the trial, higher-ups urging a swift conviction, key evidence like the fire escape entry conveniently missing. Had he been a pawn in their game? The thought turned his stomach. Robert stood, pacing, his polished shoes scuffing the floor. "If this is true, my career's over," he admitted, his voice low. James leaned forward, unrelenting. "Your career's nothing if Nathan dies for your mistake. Back us, or I go public." Robert's hands shook, his glasses fogging with sweat. Hargrove's influence loomed large, but the evidence was undeniable. "I'll call the governor's office," he said finally, his voice hollow. "We'll need a hearing," James nodded, his guilt easing slightly. The conspiracy was cracking, but the fight was far from over. By 6 p.m., Emily Carter stood outside her Redwood City townhouse, Shadow's leash tight in her hand. The German shepherd's amber eyes gleamed in the fading light, his scarred flank tense as if sensing her unease. Her green eyes burned with fury, her chestnut hair pulled back, her engagement ring glinting as she clutched her phone. The cryptic threat, "Back off or you'll regret it," still lingered, but it only fueled her fire. Someone was scared, and that meant they were close to the truth. Emily dialed a journalist, Sarah Nguyen, her voice steady despite her racing heart. "Nathan's stay is holding," she said. "We've got evidence tying Victor Kane to Richard Hargrove. Langston's murder was a hit, and Nathan was framed. Get this out there." Sarah's voice crackled with excitement. "This is huge, Emily. I'll run it tonight." Emily hung up, her resolve hardening. Public pressure could force the DA's hand, maybe even expose Hargrove's network. Shadow whined, nudging her leg, his loyalty a reminder of why she fought. Another text buzzed. "You're playing with fire." Emily's jaw tightened. She forwarded it to James, typing, "They're desperate." "Keep going." She stroked Shadow's head, her voice fierce. "We're not backing down, boy. Nathan's coming home." The evening air was cool, but Emily's determination burned bright. The conspiracy was unraveling, and she'd see it through, no matter the danger. At 7 a.m., on May 9th, 2025, Nathan Brooks stood in his new cell at Ironwood State Prison, the barred window casting faint dawn light across his gaunt face. His brown eyes, no longer dulled by despair, traced the horizon where Redwood City's skyline blurred into the distance. The 48-hour stay had shifted him from death row to general population, and the absence of chains felt surreal, like a dream he feared waking from. His calloused hands gripped the bunk's edge, steadying himself against the hope that threatened to overwhelm him. Nathan's thoughts drifted to freedom. Walking shadow along Redwood Creek, the German shepherd's tail wagging like a metronome, Emily's laughter echoing in the morning air. 5 years ago, that life had been his before Edward Langston's murder pinned him as a killer. The new evidence, Victor Kane's phone logs, the suppressed forensics, offered a lifeline, but doubt lingered. What if the hearing failed? What if he returned to the steel bed, the needle waiting? His throat tightened, the fear of disappointment a heavy weight. He sat on the bunk, running a hand through his thinning hair. Shadow's amber eyes flashed in his mind, a reminder of why he'd endured. Emily's fierce promise to fight, delivered during their reunion, echoed louder now. Nathan whispered to himself, "Just hold on." The hearing was set for tomorrow, and for the first time in years he dared to imagine a future beyond Ironwood's walls. By 9 a.m., Emily Carter sat at her Redwood City kitchen table, papers strewn across the surface, Shadow sprawled at her feet. Her green eyes, bright with determination, scanned James Carter's latest evidence, financial records tying Victor Kane to Richard Hargrove's shell company. Her chestnut hair was tied back, her engagement ring glinting as she scribbled notes for the hearing. Shadow's scarred flank rose with each breath, his amber eyes watching her, a silent partner in her fight to free Nathan. Emily's phone buzzed with a message from Sarah Nguyen. Stories Live. Hargrove's name is everywhere. The article had gone viral, sparking outrage online and protests outside the courthouse. Emily's heart raced. Public pressure could sway the judge. She called James, her voice urgent. "The financials are solid," she said. "Can we get Hargrove's associates, Patel and Stein, on record?" James's gruff reply came through. "Working on it. Riley's pulling their communications." Emily nodded, stroking Shadow's head for calm. "We're so close," she murmured, her resolve unshaken. She stood, pacing, her worn jacket slung over a chair. The threats, texts warning her to back off, hadn't stopped, but they only sharpened her focus. Shadow rose, nudging her hand, his loyalty a steady anchor. Emily knelt, her voice fierce. "Tomorrow, we bring Nathan home." The hearing was their chance, and she'd fight with everything she had to see justice done. At 11 a.m., James Carter stood in the Redwood City Police Station's evidence room, his grey eyes scanning a new batch of documents from Riley. His salt-and-pepper beard framed a face taut with focus, his limp leg ignored as he flipped through pages. The breakthrough was staggering. An email from Hargrove to Kane, dated 2 days before Langston's murder, instructing, "Handle the waterfront issue permanently." A second document showed wire transfers to Kane from Patel and Stein, Langston's other rivals, totaling $100,000. This was the conspiracy's backbone, and it could free Nathan Brooks. James's heart pounded. The financial records, paired with the forensic report and phone logs, painted a clear picture. Hargrove, Patel, and Stein had hired Kane to eliminate Langston, framing Nathan to cover their tracks. He called Warden Clara Hensley, his voice steady. "We've got Hargrove's email to Kane and payments from his partners. This is enough for the hearing." Clara's response was sharp. "Get it to the judge by morning." "I'm coordinating with the governor." James nodded, his guilt easing further. He was rewriting his mistake. He texted Emily, "Hargrove's email seals it. Prep for tomorrow." The hearing was less than 24 hours away, and James felt the weight of every second. He gathered the documents, his leather jacket creaking as he moved. The truth was in his hands, and he'd deliver it to the courtroom, no matter who tried to stop him. At 9 a.m. On May 10th, 2025, the Redwood City Courthouse buzzed with tension, its marble halls echoing with the murmurs of reporters and protesters outside. Inside Courtroom 3, Judge Margaret Alvarez took her seat, her silver hair swept into a tight bun, her stern gaze sweeping the room like a blade. Her commanding presence silenced the crowd, her black robe a symbol of unyielding authority. Nathan Brooks sat at the defense table, his gaunt face pale but resolute, his brown eyes fixed on the judge. The 48-hour stay had led to this moment, a hearing to challenge his conviction for Edward Langston's murder. Detective James Carter stood near the prosecution's table, his grey eyes steady, the damning evidence in hand. Victor Kane's phone logs, suppressed forensics, and Richard Hargrove's incriminating email. He approached the bench, his limp barely noticeable under the weight of purpose. "Your Honor," James began, his voice clear, "new evidence proves Nathan Brooks was framed." Kane's burner phone pinged at Langston's penthouse during the murder. Forensic reports, buried by the prosecution, show forced entry and gunpowder residue not tied to the defendant. Margaret's eyes narrowed, her fingers tapping the gavel lightly. "These are serious claims, Detective," she said, her tone measured. "Present your case." James handed over the documents, his salt and pepper beard framing a face taut with conviction. The courtroom held its breath as Margaret skimmed the pages, her expression unreadable. Nathan's calloused hands clenched under the table, his hope fragile but growing. Emily Carter sat in the gallery, her green eyes locked on Nathan, her engagement ring glinting as she twisted it nervously. Shadow's absence weighed on her, but his loyalty fueled her presence here. The truth was finally in the open, and Margaret's ruling could set Nathan free, or send him back to Ironwood's shadow. At 9:30 a.m., Assistant DA Robert Hayes stood before the bench, his polished suit wrinkled, his thinning hair disheveled. His nervous tick, adjusting his glasses, betrayed his crumbling resolve as he faced Judge Alvarez. The evidence James presented had gutted the case he'd built against Nathan 5 years ago. Victor Kane's phone logs, the forensic report, and Hargrove's email painted a conspiracy Robert hadn't seen or had chosen to ignore. His voice wavered as he spoke, a stark contrast to his once confident courtroom swagger. "Your Honor," Robert began, his glasses slipping, "the prosecution acknowledges flaws in the original case. The suppressed forensic report, gunpowder residue, forced entry, mismatched footprints, was not disclosed to the defense. Kane's phone records corroborate his presence at the crime scene." Gasps rippled through the courtroom, reporters scribbling furiously. Nathan's brown eyes widened, his breath catching. Emily leaned forward, her chestnut hair falling into her face, her heart pounding. Robert's admission was a crack in the system that had caged Nathan for years. Margaret's gaze bore into Robert, her voice sharp. "You're admitting prosecutorial misconduct, Mr. Hayes?" Robert swallowed, sweat beading on his brow. "Unintentional, but yes, Your Honor. The evidence suggests another perpetrator." He avoided James's stare, guilt etched in his posture. 5 years ago, he'd pushed for conviction under pressure from Langston's rivals, ignoring red flags. Now, his career teetered on the edge, but the truth demanded sacrifice. "We don't oppose a review," he added, his voice barely audible. The courtroom buzzed, the weight of his words shifting the case's foundation. By 10 o'clock a.m., Nathan's attorney, Michael Grant, rose, his sharp suit and youthful energy a stark contrast to the courtroom's heavy air. His dark eyes gleamed with determination as he addressed Judge Alvarez, his voice ringing with conviction. "Your Honor, the evidence is overwhelming. Nathan Brooks is innocent. Victor Kane, hired by Richard Hargrove and his associates, murdered Edward Langston. The prosecution's case relied on fabricated evidence and suppressed truth. We move to vacate Mr. Brooks' conviction and release him immediately," Michael gestured to the documents, his words precise. Kane's phone logs, the forensic report, and Hargrove's email prove a conspiracy. My client has lost 5 years to a lie. Nathan's calloused hands trembled, his brown eyes locked on Michael, hope surging despite the fear of another betrayal. Emily gripped the bench, her green eyes shining with tears, her engagement ring a silent vow. The gallery murmured, the weight of Michael's motion palpable. Margaret leaned forward, her silver hair catching the light, her expression unreadable. The court acknowledges the gravity of this evidence, she said, her voice steady. I'll review the motion and deliver a ruling by noon. The gavel struck, a sharp crack that echoed like a heartbeat. Nathan exhaled, his gaunt face a mix of dread and anticipation. James nodded at Michael, his gray eyes resolute. Emily whispered, almost there, her voice a prayer. The truth had its moment, but the judge's decision would shape Nathan's fate. At 12:00 p.m. on May 10, 2025, Judge Margaret Alvarez returned to the Redwood City courtroom, her silver hair glinting under the fluorescent lights, her stern gaze silencing the restless crowd. The air crackled with anticipation, reporters poised with pens, protesters' chants faint through the windows. Nathan Brooks sat at the defense table, his gaunt face tight with hope and fear, his brown eyes fixed on the judge. Emily Carter gripped the gallery bench, her green eyes glistening, her chestnut hair tucked behind her ears, her engagement ring still as she held her breath. Margaret's voice cut through the tension, steady and authoritative. After reviewing the evidence, Victor Kane's phone logs, suppressed forensic reports, and financial ties to Richard Hargrove and his associates, the court finds substantial proof of a miscarriage of justice. Nathan Brooks' conviction for the murder of Edward Langston is hereby vacated. The courtroom erupted, gasps and cheers drowning out her next words. Mr. Brooks is to be released immediately. The gavel struck, a thunderclap of finality. Nathan's calloused hands shook, his brown eyes welling with tears, as Michael Grant clapped his shoulder, a grin breaking through his professional demeanor. Emily sobbed, her hands covering her mouth, relief flooding her. James Carter stood near the back, his gray eyes soft with redemption, his salt and pepper beard framing a faint smile. 5 years of guilt lifted, replaced by the weight of justice served. Nathan rose, unsteady, his gaunt frame trembling as he faced the gallery, meeting Emily's gaze, a silent promise of a new beginning. By 1:00 p.m., Nathan stepped into Ironwood State Prison's release area, the heavy gate clanging shut behind him. The May sun warmed his face, a sensation so foreign it overwhelmed him. Emily waited beyond the fence, shadow at her side, the German shepherd's amber eyes bright with recognition. His black and tan fur gleamed, his scarred flank quivering as he strained against the leash, tail whipping furiously. Emily's green eyes shone with tears, her worn jacket open, her chestnut hair loose in the breeze. Nathan crossed the lot, his steps hesitant, his brown eyes locked on them. Emily released Shadow, who bounded forward, leaping into Nathan's arms with a joyful bark. Nathan knelt, his calloused hands sinking into Shadow's fur, laughter and sobs mingling as he buried his face in the dog's neck. "I missed you, boy," he whispered, his voice raw. Emily reached them, her arms wrapping around Nathan, her tears soaking his shirt. "You're home," she said, her voice breaking. Nathan pulled her close, their embrace a lifeline after 5 years apart. The press swarmed, cameras flashing, but Nathan and Emily ignored them, lost in their reunion. James and Warden Clara Hensley watched from a distance, their nods a quiet acknowledgement of their roles. Shadow pressed against Nathan's leg, his amber eyes calm, as if knowing the fight was won. The world felt vast, daunting. But with Emily and Shadow beside him, Nathan felt ready to face it. At 2 p.m., Nathan and Emily drove through Redwood City. Shadow sprawled across the back seat of her pickup, his scarred flank rising with contented breaths. Nathan's brown eyes scanned the city, its glass towers and bustling streets alien after Ironwood's confines. His gaunt face softened, the weight of freedom sinking in, though the lost years lingered like a scar. Emily's hand rested on his, her green eyes warm, her engagement ring a promise they'd reclaim their future. They pulled into Emily's townhouse lot, the familiar sight stirring memories of their old life. Late-night talks, Shadow's playful bounds in the yard. Nathan stepped out, the air sweet with spring, and Shadow followed, tail wagging. "It's different," Nathan said, his voice quiet, noting new storefronts, change signs. Emily squeezed his hand. "We'll figure it out together," she said, her voice steady. Nathan nodded, his calloused hands brushing Shadow's head, grounding him in the moment. Inside, Nathan paused at the threshold, the cozy clutter of Emily's home. Photos, books, Shadow's bed, a stark contrast to his cell. He exhaled, a smile tugging at his lips. "I'm really here," he murmured. Emily's arms circled him, her warmth a beacon. Shadow settled at their feet, amber eyes watchful. The future was uncertain, but Nathan felt a spark of hope, ready to rebuild with the two who'd never left his side. At 8 a.m. on May 11th, 2025, Nathan Brooks stood in the small backyard of Emily Carter's Redwood City townhouse, the morning sun casting long shadows across the grass. His brown eyes, still adjusting to the open sky, followed Shadow as the German shepherd bounded after a tennis ball, his black and tan fur gleaming, his scarred flank a testament to years of loyalty. Nathan's gaunt frame felt lighter, his calloused hands gripping the ball before tossing it again, a simple act that grounded him in freedom. Yet, the weight of 5 lost years lingered, a quiet ache beneath the joy. Emily stepped outside, her green eyes warm, her chestnut hair catching the light as she carried 2 mugs of coffee. Her engagement ring glinted, a symbol of their unbroken bond. "You're up early," she said, her voice soft but teasing, handing him a mug. Nathan's lips curved into a faint smile, his first real one in years. "Couldn't sleep," he admitted, his voice low. "Keeps feeling like a dream." Emily's hand brushed his, her touch steadying him. Rebuilding their life meant navigating trust, not just with each other, but with a world that had branded him a killer. They sat on the porch steps, Shadow settling at their feet, his amber eyes watchful. Nathan sipped the coffee, its warmth spreading through him. "I want to go back to the shop," he said, referring to the auto repair business he'd once run. "Start small, maybe?" Emily nodded, her gaze encouraging. "You'll get there. We'll figure it out." Her words were a promise, but Nathan's thoughts flickered to the stares he'd face, the whispers of his past. Freedom was his, but trust would take time. By 10:30 a.m., Nathan ventured into downtown Redwood City, Emily at his side, Shadow's leash in her hand. The bustling streets, alive with chatter and the hum of traffic, felt overwhelming after Ironwood's sterile silence. Nathan's brown eyes scanned the faces, some curious, others wary, a few recognizing him from the viral news of his exoneration. His gaunt face tightened, his calloused hands shoved into his jacket pockets, bracing for judgment. Emily's green eyes met his, her voice firm. "You belong here, Nathan. Don't let them make you feel otherwise." They stopped at a cafe, its glass windows reflecting the May sun. Inside, conversations hushed as Nathan entered, Shadow's presence drawing smiles that softened the tension. A barista, a young woman with a nose ring, approached. "You're Nathan Brooks, right?" she asked, her tone kind. Nathan nodded, bracing for condemnation, but she grinned. "Heard what happened. That's messed up. Coffee's on us." Nathan's shoulders relaxed, a flicker of gratitude warming him. Emily squeezed his arm, her engagement ring catching the light, her pride evident. Outside, a small crowd gathered, some holding phones, others offering nods of support. A man in a baseball cap called out, "Glad you're free, man!" Nathan managed a quiet, "Thanks," his voice steadier. The public's response wasn't all warm. Some glares lingered, but the support outweighed the doubt. Shadow nudged his leg, amber eyes calm, grounding him. Nathan felt a spark of belonging, a sign that Redwood City might accept him again. At 2:00 p.m., Nathan and Emily visited the old auto shop where he'd worked before his arrest, its faded sign still hanging above a cluttered lot. The owner, a gruff man named Tony, greeted them, his weathered face breaking into a smile. "Heard you were out," he said, clapping Nathan's shoulder. "Shop's yours if you want it back." Nathan's brown eyes widened, his gaunt face softening. "You mean that?" he asked, his voice thick. Tony nodded. "Always knew you didn't do it." Nathan walked through the garage, the scent of oil and metal, stirring memories of late nights fixing engines, Shadow trailing him in their old life. His calloused hands brushed a wrench, the familiar weight reassuring. Emily watched, her green eyes shining, her chestnut hair tucked behind her ears. "This is it, Nathan," she said. "Your fresh start." Shadow's tail thumped, his scarred flank gleaming in the dim light, as if approving. Nathan nodded, a quiet resolve settling in. He'd rebuild, one repair at a time. Back at the townhouse, Nathan sat with Emily, Shadow sprawled across their feet. "I'm scared," he admitted, his voice low. "What if I can't do this?" Emily's hand found his, her ring a steady anchor. "You've survived worse," she said, her voice fierce. "We'll do this together." Nathan's brown eyes met hers, hope outweighing fear. With Emily and Shadow, he was ready to reclaim his life. At 9:00 a.m. on May 12th, 2025, Detective James Carter sat in his unmarked sedan outside a rundown motel on Redwood City's outskirts, his gray eyes scanning the parking lot. His salt and pepper beard framed a face hardened by purpose, his limp legs stiff from hours of stakeouts. Victor Kane, the fixer who'd killed Edward Langston and framed Nathan Brooks, was still at large, and James was determined to bring him in. A tip from Riley, his data specialist, placed Kane here, hiding under an alias after the conspiracy unraveled. James's phone buzzed with a new message from Riley. "Kane's using a burner registered to a fake ID. Last ping was 20 minutes ago, room 12. James's jaw tightened, his weathered hands gripping the steering wheel. The evidence, Kane's phone logs, the forensic report, Hargrove's email, had freed Nathan, but justice demanded more. Kane's arrest could expose Richard Hargrove, Patel, and Stein fully, dismantling their corrupt network. James checked his sidearm, the leather of his jacket creaking, and stepped into the morning heat, his limp a minor obstacle. He approached room 12, his gray eyes catching a shadow behind the curtain. A quick knock, then a low command. "Kane, it's over." "Come out?" The door creaked open, revealing Kane, lean with cold blue eyes and a smirk that faded at James's unyielding stare. "You've got nothing," Kane sneered, but his voice wavered. James held up the burner phone records, his voice steady. "You're done." Kane's smirk vanished, and James knew he had him. By 10:15 a.m., James had Victor Kane in cuffs, the motel's parking lot now swarming with Redwood City PD. Kane's blue eyes darted, his lean frame tense as officers searched his room, uncovering a laptop with encrypted files linking him to Hargrove's shell company. James's grey eyes gleamed with quiet triumph, his salt and pepper beard catching the sun as he read Kane his rights. "You killed Langston," James said, voice low. "Framed an innocent man." "You're not slipping this time." Kane's smirk returned, but it was hollow. "Hargrove's untouchable," he muttered, his voice laced with defiance. James leaned closer, his limp leg steady now. "Not anymore. You're the key, and you're turning." The laptop's files, combined with the email and financials, could bury Hargrove and his partners. James handed Kane to an officer, his mind already on the DA's office, where Robert Hayes was preparing charges against the tycoons. The conspiracy was crumbling, and James felt redemption in every step. Back at the station, James met Warden Clara Hensley, her silver-streaked hair pulled tight, her scarred cheek softening as she nodded. "Good work, Carter," she said, her hazel eyes approving. "This closes the loop." James's guilt, heavy since Nathan's arrest, lifted further. He'd righted his wrong, but the fight wasn't over. Hargrove's arrest was next, and James wouldn't rest until it was done. At 3:00 p.m., Nathan and Emily stood by Redwood Creek, Shadow chasing a stick along the bank, his amber eyes bright with joy. Nathan's brown eyes, softer now, watched the German shepherd, his gaunt face warmed by the sun. Emily's green eyes met his, her chestnut hair loose, her engagement ring a quiet promise. News of Kane's arrest had reached them via Sarah Nguyen's latest article, and the weight of justice felt real, a victory they'd fought for together. Nathan tossed the stick, Shadow bounding after it, and turned to Emily. "Kane's in custody," he said, his voice steady. "Hargrove's next." Emily nodded, her hand finding his, her voice fierce. "They can't hide anymore." The conspiracy that stole 5 years was unraveling, and Nathan felt a surge of strength. He wasn't just a survivor. He was part of the fight, his story fueling calls for reform in Redwood City's courts. They walked along the creek, Shadow at their heels, the city's skyline a backdrop to their shared resolve. Nathan's calloused hands brushed Emily's, his brown eyes holding hers. "We did this," he said, a smile breaking through. Emily's green eyes shone, her voice soft but certain. "And we're just getting started." Shadow barked, his scarred flank gleaming, as if sealing their vow. Justice was theirs, and the future was theirs to shape. At 8:00 a.m., on May 13th, 2025, Richard Hargrove sat in his penthouse office, overlooking Redwood City's gleaming skyline, his steely blue eyes narrowing as he scanned the morning news on his tablet. The headlines screamed of Victor Kane's arrest, tying the fixer to Edward Langston's murder and implicating Hargrove's real estate empire. His tailored suit was crisp, his silver hair immaculate, but a faint tremor in his manicured hands betrayed his unease. The conspiracy he'd orchestrated, paying Kane to eliminate Langston and framing Nathan Brooks, was unraveling, and the walls were closing in. Hargrove's phone buzzed with a call from his lawyer, Evelyn Marsh. "The DA's building a case," she said, her voice clipped. "Kane's laptop has your emails, and the financials trace back to your shell company." Hargrove's jaw tightened, his voice low and cold. "Kane won't talk. He knows what happens if he does." But doubt gnawed at him. Kane's loyalty was bought, not earned. Hargrove had underestimated Detective James Carter's tenacity, and now Nathan's exoneration had sparked a public outcry that threatened his untouchable status. He stood, pacing the glass-walled office, his polished shoes silent on the marble floor. Patel and Stein, his co-conspirators, were already distancing themselves, their own lawyers circling. Hargrove's mind raced. Evidence could be buried, witnesses silenced. But Carter's dogged pursuit and the viral media storm were harder to control. He dialed a private number, his voice sharp. "I need leverage on Carter. Find something." The game wasn't over, and Hargrove would fight to keep his empire intact, no matter the cost. By 10 o'clock a.m., James Carter stood in the Redwood City Police Station's evidence room, his gray eyes scanning a decrypted file from Kane's laptop. His salt-and-pepper beard framed a face etched with determination, his limp leg aching but ignored. The file contained a recorded call between Hargrove and Kane, dated the night before Langston's murder, with Hargrove's voice clear. "Make it clean. No loose ends." James's pulse quickened. This was the smoking gun. Combined with the financials and forensic report, it could bring Hargrove down. He called Assistant DA Robert Hayes, his voice urgent. "We've got Hargrove on tape ordering the hit. I'm bringing it to you now." Robert's reply was tense. "Hargrove's lawyers are already pushing back. We need this airtight." James nodded, his leather jacket creaking as he gathered the evidence. Hargrove's influence ran deep, with connections in the DA's office and beyond. Exposing him meant risking retaliation. But James's guilt over Nathan's wrongful conviction drove him forward. He'd failed once. He wouldn't again. As James left the station, his phone buzzed with an anonymous text. "Drop the case, or your family pays." His gray eyes hardened, his hand brushing the sidearm under his jacket. Hargrove was desperate, and that made him dangerous. James forwarded the threat to Riley, typing, "Trace this. Hargrove's panicking." The hunt was on, and James would see it through, no matter the stakes. At 12 o'clock p.m., Emily Carter sat in her Redwood City townhouse, Shadow sprawled by the door, his amber eyes alert. Her green eyes scanned her laptop, where Sarah Nguyen's latest article detailed Kane's arrest and Hargrove's ties to the conspiracy. Her chestnut hair was pulled back, her engagement ring glinting as she typed a message to a local activist group, urging them to keep pressure on the DA. Nathan's freedom was a victory, but Hargrove's empire still loomed, a threat to their fragile peace. A new text flashed on her phone. "You can't hide." Emily's jaw tightened, her fear giving way to resolve. She'd received similar threats since Nathan's exoneration, each one a sign they were hitting a nerve. She forwarded it to James, adding, "Hargrove's scared. Don't let up." Shadow whined, sensing her tension, his scarred flank rising as he nudged her hand. Emily stroked his head, her voice fierce. "We're not stopping, boy. Not until they're all down." She called Nathan, who was at the auto shop, his voice steady over the hum of tools. "James has Hargrove on tape," she said. This could end it. Nathan's reply was quiet but firm. "Good. Let's finish this." Emily hung up, her green eyes burning with purpose. Hargrove's power was crumbling, and she'd fight to see justice served, for Nathan and for the truth. At 9 o'clock a.m. on May 14th, 2025, Redwood City's courthouse was a fortress of tension, surrounded by protesters chanting for justice. Inside, Richard Hargrove stood in the defendant's dock, his steely blue eyes defiant, his silver hair still impeccable despite the cuffs on his wrists. The evidence, Victor Kane's testimony, the recorded call, and financial records, had led to his arrest late the previous night. Detective James Carter sat in the gallery, his gray eyes steady, his salt-and-pepper beard framing a face calm with vindication. The conspiracy that framed Nathan Brooks was collapsing, and Hargrove's empire was next. Assistant DA Robert Hayes presented the case, his voice firm, his nervous tick gone. Richard Hargrove orchestrated Edward Langston's murder, hiring Victor Kane to eliminate a rival and framing Nathan Brooks to cover it up. We have Kane's confession, audio evidence, and financials tying Hargrove to the crime. The judge, a stern woman with sharp eyes, nodded, her gavel poised. Hargrove's lawyer, Evelyn Marsh, argued fiercely, but the evidence was overwhelming. Hargrove's gaze flickered, his composure cracking as Kane's recorded voice echoed in the courtroom. Make it clean. The judge's ruling came swiftly. Richard Hargrove, you are remanded pending trial for conspiracy and murder. The gavel struck and the crowd erupted, cheers spilling into the halls. James exhaled, his limp leg still, his redemption complete. Hargrove was led away, his blue eyes burning with rage, but his power was broken. Justice had caught up, and Nathan's name was clear. By 11:00 a.m., Nathan Brooks stood outside the courthouse, the May sun warm on his gaunt face, his brown eyes bright with relief. Emily Carter was at his side, her green eyes shining, her chestnut hair loose, her engagement ring a symbol of their shared victory. Shadow sat between them, his amber eyes calm, his scarred flank gleaming as his tail thumped softly. The press swarmed, but Nathan faced them, his voice steady. I lost 5 years, he said, but I'm here now, thanks to those who fought for me. Reporters shouted questions, and Nathan's calloused hands tightened briefly before relaxing. Hargrove's arrest means the truth won, he continued. I just want to live my life. Emily squeezed his hand, her pride evident. Sarah Nguyen, the journalist who'd amplified their story, approached, her notebook open. You're a symbol now, Nathan, she said. People want reform. Nathan nodded, his brown eyes thoughtful. He hadn't sought this role, but he'd carry it for those still trapped by injustice. They walked to Emily's truck, Shadow's leash in Nathan's hand, the city's pulse a reminder of freedom. Nathan's thoughts turned to the auto shop, to rebuilding with Emily and Shadow. The scars of Ironwood lingered, but Hargrove's fall was a balm, proof that their fight had mattered. Nathan's redemption was complete, and his future was his own. At 3:00 p.m., Nathan and Emily sat by Redwood Creek, the water glinting under the afternoon sun. Shadow chased a stick, his black and tan fur a blur, his amber eyes joyful. Nathan's brown eyes softened, his gaunt face relaxed, the weight of 5 years fading with each laugh Emily shared. Her green eyes met his, her engagement ring catching the light as she leaned against him, her chestnut hair brushing his shoulder. We made it, she said, her voice warm. Nathan nodded, his calloused hands tossing the stick for Shadow. I couldn't have done it without you, he said, his voice thick. Or him. Shadow bounded back, dropping the stick at their feet, his scarred flank a reminder of their shared resilience. Nathan thought of James Carter, whose pursuit of truth had toppled Hargrove, and of the community that rallied behind him. Their victory was collective, a testament to persistence against power. They stood, walking along the creek, Shadow at their heels. Nathan's brown eyes traced the horizon, where Redwood City's skyline stood not as a threat, but as a canvas for their future. Let's get married, he said suddenly, his voice certain. Emily's green eyes widened, then softened, a smile breaking through. Yes, she whispered, her hand in his. Shadow barked, as if sealing the promise. With justice served and love restored, Nathan was ready to forge a new life, one step at a time.